They didn't just beat a confession out of Ronald Kitchen. They made him believe that dying in that room might be easier than what they were going to do to him if he kept saying no. This is Chicago, 1988, and this is what the system did to an innocent man when it decided he was guilty before it looked at a single piece of evidence. This is buried judgment. This is what the system tried to bury, and this is what we're digging up. Subscribe. The files are open. You need to know who Ronald Kitchen was before you know what they did to him, because that is always the part the system forgets. He was 23 years old. He lived on Chicago's South Side. He was still the kind of man who would walk his mother to the bus stop in the morning and come back with a paper bag of groceries swinging at his side, trying to look like he had somewhere important to be. Not a predator, not a killer. A 23-year-old on the South Side, trying to take care of his mother and figure out what his life was going to look like. That was Ronald Kitchen in the summer of 1988. By the end of that summer, he was on death row. On a humid July night in 1988, something terrible happened inside a small apartment on Chicago's South Side. When the neighbors finally pushed the door open, the smell hit them before anything else. Thick, metallic. The specific sour weight of blood that has been sitting in summer heat long enough to begin changing into something else. It had soaked into the carpet so deeply the fibers had stiffened and turned dark. It had reached the walls, the ceiling in one corner. 5 bodies lay inside, all of them stabbed multiple times, some found in their beds, in the positions of people who had no warning before it came for them. Others in the specific desperate positions of people who had tried to fight or run and had not gotten far enough. The apartment looked like rage, not just violence, rage. Whoever had done this had not come to kill 5 people and leave. They had come to tear through that space until there was nothing left of them. One of the victims was Rose Kitchen, Ronald Kitchen's mother, the woman he walked to the bus stop every morning, the woman whose groceries he carried home swinging at his side. She was one of the 5 people lying on that floor. Read that again. His mother. And the Chicago Police Department looked at that fact, at the specific devastating reality of a young man whose mother had just been murdered, and decided it made him a suspect. The detectives who caught the case worked out of Area 2 violent crimes on Chicago's South Side. Area 2. If you know anything about the history of the Chicago Police Department in the 1980s, those 2 words should stop you cold. Because Area 2 was not just a detective division. It was something that had been operating in the dark for years. Something the Chicago Police Department knew about. Something the Cook County State's Attorney's Office knew about. Something that politicians and judges and prosecutors had looked at and decided was less important than the cases it was closing. The man who ran it was named John Burge, a Chicago police commander who had served in Vietnam and had come back with specific knowledge of what sustained pressure did to a human body and a human mind. He brought those methods into the interrogation rooms of Area 2. He applied them systematically, repeatedly, over more than 2 decades to more than 100 black men on Chicago's South Side. Not one bad night, not one detective making one terrible decision. 100 men, same rooms, same methods, same result. Confessions that sent men to prison and death row for crimes the evidence didn't support, because the men confessing to them had not committed them. John Burge ran this for years. The department protected him. The state's attorney's office used what he produced. The courts processed it. And on the South Side, men disappeared into Area 2 and came out broken. And the system called it justice and kept moving. Ronald Kitchen walked into that system in the summer of 1988. He was 23 years old. They brought him in within days of the murders. No physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene. No forensic evidence. No witnesses who placed him at the apartment. They had proximity. They had pressure. They had a case that needed to close. They took him into a room. They did not let him leave for a very long time. The first hours were the standard architecture of a John Burge interrogation. Detectives rotating in and out, never the same face long enough for Ronald Kitchen to get his bearings. Never long enough for the pressure to ease before the next wave of it arrived. The questions coming from different angles, but always circling back to the same place, building the implication that the evidence already proved what they needed it to prove, and and the only question left was whether he was going to make this easy or hard. Ronald Kitchen said he didn't do it. They made it hard. They denied him sleep, not as a temporary measure, as a deliberate, sustained method. Sleep deprivation does specific things to the human mind that have been documented extensively in the years since. It degrades the ability to hold a position under pressure. It makes the world feel unreal in ways that are difficult to describe from the outside. It makes the certainty of, I know what I did and did not do, feel less absolute, less available, like a grip being slowly forced open no matter how hard you try to keep it closed. Ronald Kitchen held on. They screamed at him for hours in shifts, so the screaming never fully stopped, even when the faces changed. He held on. They threatened him, told him what was coming. He held on. Then they pulled out the typewriter cover. A standard piece of office equipment, the kind that sat on every desk in every police precinct in America in 1988. In Area 2, it had a different use. They pulled it over Ronald Kitchen's head. They held it down around his face. They cut off his air. It wasn't the fabric that scared him most. It was the way the room went quiet while they held it over his face, like they were all just standing there, watching to see how long it would take before he finally gave them what they wanted. No screaming now, no threats, just silence. And the specific suffocating experience of a Chicago police interrogation room where the men doing this to you are patient because they have done it before and they know how it ends. He could feel his lungs working against him, the specific panic of a body being denied air, overriding everything else in the process of trying to survive. The fabric pressing against his face with each desperate attempt to breathe. The world contracting down to the single fact of not enough air, and the hands holding the fabric in place, and the silence of the men watching. They let him breathe. Then they asked the question again. He said no. They put it back. When suffocation wasn't enough, they escalated. John Burge's operation had a second tool, a black box, homemade, wired to produce electrical current that could be applied to the body, to the fingers, to the ears. Applied with the specific practiced knowledge of a system that had learned through repetition exactly how much was required to make a human being say anything, sign anything, agree to whatever version of events was placed in front of him just to make it stop. Ronald Kitchen felt it, the way it moves through you, the way it removes the ability to think clearly enough to maintain a position, the way survival overrides everything else, including the truth, including the certainty that you did not do what they are asking you to say you did. Ronald Kitchen held on longer than most. He was 23 years old, and he had walked his mother to the bus stop that morning, and his mother was one of the people dead in that apartment, and none of it made any difference in that room. That room was not interested in any of it. Eventually, Ronald Kitchen broke, not because he was weak, because he was human, because the body and the mind have limits, and the men in that room had found his. He told them what they wanted to hear. He told them how. The details he provided did not match the crime scene. Some of what he described was physically impossible. The detectives did not care. They had the confession. That was enough. Ronald Kitchen was charged with 5 counts of murder. Marcellius Bradford was charged alongside him, another young man from the South Side, another man who had been in those rooms, another man whose confession didn't match the evidence. 2 men, 2 confessions, 0 physical evidence connecting either of them to what happened in that apartment. The trial proceeded. The jury never heard about the typewriter cover. They never heard about the electricity. They never heard how long Kitchen had been held or what had been done to him to produce the admission, now being read aloud in a courtroom as though it were a voluntary statement freely given by a man who had simply decided to tell the truth. They heard that he had confessed. They heard the confession. That was the case. Ronald Kitchen was convicted of 5 counts of murder. He was sentenced to death. He was 23 years old. He was going to die for crimes he did not commit in a system that already knew it. Death row is its own specific horror, not the violence, not even the knowledge that the state has decided to kill you. The thing that the men who survived it come back to again and again is the waiting. The specific daily experience of waking up in a cell, knowing 2 things simultaneously. That you did not do this, and that the machinery built to execute you for doing it is still moving. Every morning, both of those facts present at the same time. Every appeal filed, every motion denied, every year passing and the walls staying the same, and the truth sitting exactly where it had always been, waiting for someone with the power to act on it to finally look. Ronald Kitchen spent 21 years in that waiting, 23 becoming 24, becoming 30, becoming 40. The South Side, outside those walls, moving forward without him. His mother already gone. The man who killed her still free. The system that had put him there, not looking for that man because it had already decided who was responsible and had no interest in reconsidering. The real killer lived a life. Woke up in the morning without cell doors, moved through the world, while Ronald Kitchen marked years on death row for what that man had done. The thing that finally forced the system to look was the thing it had been hoping would just disappear. DNA evidence collected from the crime scene in 1988 had been sitting in storage for years, not tested, not processed, just sitting there. The specific physical proof of who had been in that apartment on that July night in 1988, waiting in a facility while Ronald Kitchen waited on death row. When it was finally tested, it did not match Ronald Kitchen. It did not match Marcellius Bradford. It pointed somewhere else entirely. The system that had suffocated a confession out of a 23-year-old man, convicted him on that confession, sentenced him to death on that confession, and defended that conviction for more than 2 decades against mounting evidence that the confession was false, was forced in 2009 to admit what the evidence had been saying since 1988. Ronald Kitchen did not kill those 5 people. He was exonerated. He walked out of a prison he had entered at 23 years old. He was 44. John Burge was never convicted of torture. The statute of limitations had expired. He was convicted in 2010 of perjury and obstruction of justice for lying about the torture, not for the torture itself. He served 4.5 years. He received his police pension while he was inside. He kept receiving it after he got out. He died in 2018, having never been held accountable for what he did to Ronald Kitchen in that room, for what he did to more than 100 men in those rooms over 2 decades. He died having paid less of a price for those things than Ronald Kitchen paid for a single night in an interrogation room on Chicago's South Side. The 5 people murdered in that apartment on a humid July night in 1988 never received real justice. Their actual killer was never properly identified and prosecuted because the Chicago Police Department made up its mind in the first days of the investigation and refused to look anywhere else. They deserved better. They deserved a system that followed the evidence instead of building a case around a confession manufactured in a room where a 23-year-old man was suffocated with a typewriter cover and shocked with a homemade black box until he said whatever they needed him to say. Ronald Kitchen was awarded a settlement from the city of Chicago. Millions of dollars. For 21 years on death row for crimes he did not commit, for the typewriter cover, for the electricity, for every morning waking up knowing both things at the same time. You cannot settle 21 years. You can put a number on it. You can stand in a room and say the words, but you cannot give back what was taken. At 23, Ronald Kitchen walked his mother to the bus stop every morning and came back with groceries swinging at his side, trying to look like he had somewhere important to be. His mother was one of the 5 people murdered in that apartment. He spent 21 years on death row for her murder. The man who killed her was never properly held accountable. The man who tortured a false confession out of her son served 4.5 years for lying about it and collected his pension the whole time. This is what happens when the verdict comes before the truth. This is what happens when the machine decides it would rather be right than correct. This is what happens when the people in that room decide the truth matters less than closing the case, and the system around them agrees, and 21 years pass. This is Buried Judgment, and we are just getting started. Subscribe. The files are open. The system said you are innocent 21 years after it put him in that room, and Ronald Kitchen walked out into a world that had kept moving without him, carrying everything that room had done to him, and everything it had taken, that no settlement and no exoneration and no words from any judge could ever give back.